Well, I love my wife. She's incredible. Yeah, a great mother. Yeah, the kids are healthy and happy, and of course there's nothing more than that. Richard Gere was once everything Hollywood craved. Handsome, dangerous, sensual, and defiant. He earned millions with just a smile, captivated the world in Pretty Woman, and became a timeless sex symbol after just one role in American Gigolo, where he bared it all to portray an upscale escort. He embodied lust and cool detachment, fame and spotlight for over 2 decades. Richard Gere wasn't just a star, he was the standard of manhood, and then he vanished. No more leading roles, no scandals, no farewell announcement. One day people simply realized he had left Hollywood, left America, and the most shocking question wasn't just why he left, but did he walk away empty-handed or with something more? For years, Richard Gere owned an impressive real estate empire that spanned across the United States, from sprawling estates in suburban New York, a stately mansion in Connecticut, to a high-end apartment in the heart of Manhattan. Private forests, wine cellars, horse stables, guest houses, man-made rock streams. He once lived like a modern aristocrat in America, but then he sold it all. No warning, no elaborate explanation. Richard Gere walked away from America, the country where he was born, where Hollywood once worshipped him, where everything once belonged to him. No one understood why a man who had reached the peak of fame, holding over $120 million in his hands, gave it all up to start again somewhere. No one expected he didn't buy a yacht. He didn't launch a company. He didn't move to California. He vanished from the showbiz map. So where's he living now? What made him leave? What made him turn his back on the superstar game? And ultimately, what is he really holding on to? What is he quietly keeping that few people know about, and why is it so unlike everything you imagine about a Hollywood star? But to understand why Richard Gere walked away from it all, America, the spotlight, and millions in property, we need to go back to where it all began. Not in Hollywood, but in a small town where a quiet boy once believed that music and philosophy could save the world. Richard Gere was born on August 31st, 1949, in a peaceful town near Syracuse, New York. His family wasn't wealthy and no one had ties to the arts. His father was an insurance salesman, his mother a homemaker. It was a modest home, but steeped in music, discipline, and humanism, a place that nurtured a contemplative, introspective Richard Gere. Always slightly out of step with the crowd, he didn't start out as an actor in high school. He played the trumpet, practiced diligently, and excelled in gymnastics. In 1967, he received a scholarship to the University of Massachusetts Amherst, majoring in philosophy and theater, an unusual combination, but one that foreshadowed a path unlike any other. After 2 years, he dropped out, not out of frustration, but because he didn't need a diploma to live in alignment with who he was. Richard Gere left school and he steadily moved through roles in Looking for Mr. Goodbar, Days of Heaven, Yanks. But the real door opened when John Travolta turned down a risky, provocative role, and it landed in Richard Gere's hands. That was 1980, and the film was American Gigolo. From the moment Gere appeared on screen, naked, unapologetic, embodying a high-end escort, he was no longer a promising actor. He became an icon of understated sensuality, of quiet intensity, of the modern man who doesn't need to shout to make the whole world turn and look American. Gigolo didn't just turn Richard Gere into a global sex symbol. It marked the beginning of a phase where everything he touched became a phenomenon. 2 years later, he starred in An Officer and a Gentleman, a seemingly straightforward military romance that turned into a worldwide hit, grossing nearly $130 million at the box office and earning multiple Oscar nominations. Gere became an indispensable face of 1980s Hollywood. But Richard Gere didn't follow the predictable path. Instead of repeating the perfect gentleman archetype, he bent a bold stage play about homosexual victims in Nazi concentration camps. The role earned him the Theatre World Award. No EDM music, no VIP lounges, just silence and long mindful breaths. It wasn't a business venture. It was a statement of life in Tuscany, Italy, where he once spent an entire afternoon walking just to hear the wind and the clink of wine glasses. Gere partnered with Tenuta Sanfilippo to produce Brunello di Montalcino, one of Italy's most prestigious wines, under the Bedford Post label. These bottles carry a deep tannin, a sweet finish, and a trace of solitude. I can't imagine a meal without wine, he once said, not out of addiction, but because he sees wine as part of a rhythm, a slow, thoughtful, sensory rhythm. In his 70s, Richard Gere doesn't manage time. He strolls through gardens, plays with his young children, meditates each morning, and regularly joins his wife in environmental, educational, and humanitarian causes. His life has no tight schedule but holds clear structure, not busy, but always full. And what's worth noting is this: he chose to live that way while still at the height of wealth, fame, and fully capable of making 10 more films if he wanted to. Lifestyle isn't loud, but it's precisely that silence that makes people step back and see him differently. A man who refused to become a Hollywood product so he could live as a real human being. When a man chooses to live simply amid millions of dollars, it's clear it's not because he lacks, but because he already has more than enough. For over 3 decades, Richard Gere owned a real estate map. Any A-list star would envy the lands. He bought, stayed, and restored, and eventually left behind. All shared one thing in common: they weren't just shelters. They were reflections of a life philosophy. In 1987, as his career was taking off, Richard Gere bought a property in Pound Ridge, New York for $5 million. Not Beverly Hills, not Malibu, but a town just an hour's drive from Manhattan, utterly secluded. Over the years, he quietly expanded it, acquiring adjacent lots, building 5 he once belonged to. Then in 2022, he sold it, priced $28 million, a steep number. But what surprised the public more was how he left no statement, no photos, no farewell, just a quiet listing and a silent transaction. Just months later, he purchased a historic estate in New Canaan, Connecticut, once owned by music legends Paul Simon and Edie Brickell. The 31-acre property included a 6-bedroom, 11-bathroom main house, a separate 3-bedroom guest house, ancient forest, rock, streams, waterfalls, a fish pond, outdoor pool, and woodland trails, a home with classic English charm, tucked into the heart of America. But Richard Gere wasn't just planning to live. He had a vision. He submitted plans to the New Canaan Planning Commission to transform 27 acres into an eco-agricultural farm, growing mushrooms, raising bees, possibly dairy goats, a self-sustaining model where he could live, produce, and raise his children in harmony with land, nature, and roots. Then in 2024, just 2 years later, he sold it again, priced $75 million, virtually breaking even. The farm project was canceled. Everything was quickly listed and discreetly transferred. No one knew why. No scandal, no failure, no public explanation, only one truth: he left the United States, his destination Spain, not London, not Provence, but a quiet suburb north of Madrid. Alcobendas. There, Richard Gere purchased an €11 million villa with a private wine cellar, vast garden, horse stables, and a 34-acre property, enough for his 2 young sons to run all afternoon without ever touching a fence. No fountains, no sports cars, no 24/7 security, just wine trees, Spanish voices, and his wife's family nearby. "My wife gave me 6 years to live in my world," he told Vanity Fair Spain. "Now I think it's time I live in hers." And so in his 70s, Richard Gere vanished from the United States, the place where he once rose to the top, where he had everything, to begin again in another country, in a home no one can photograph, living a life with no schedule. Even so, he still kept a few places for when he might return, like the apartment in Gramercy Park, New York, which he bought in 2016 for over $2 million following Jimmy Fallon's advice, or the house in Southampton, initially purchased for $6. He simply chose not to carry it with him. Living spaces are only part of the story. What he chooses to drive, to keep, and to let go also reflects the way he lives in Richard Gere's garage. There are no flashy million-dollar supercars, but there is the careful selection of someone who loves classic beauty. He once owned a Jaguar E-Type, the very model Enzo Ferrari called the most beautiful car in the world, a Mercedes-Benz R107, a refined coupe from the 70s symbolizing sophistication and durability. Gere also drove a 2015 Jaguar XK Sleek, design wood-trimmed interior, a powerful yet understated V8 engine very much like himself. Notably, he had a 2004 Lotus Esprit, a rare low-slung compact sensual car, like a moment of thrill he never needed anyone to see. All of them were real cars, not props for magazine photo shoots, and when it was time to part ways, he never hesitated. In 2023, Richard Gere auctioned off his 1999 Jaguar XK8 convertible for $31,000 to support war victims in Ukraine, a simple gesture. No campaign, no media, no hashtags, but enough to show what he spends money on. But the most important asset Richard Gere has kept isn't on any map, and it can't be priced in dollars. He hasn't apologized beyond that. Gere supports Survival International, a group fighting for endangered indigenous communities, and once founded an HIV/AIDS charity in India, building medical facilities for women and children affected by the disease. In his study there are no trophies on the walls, just Tibetan Buddhist paintings, ancient statues, and handwritten scripture manuscripts. Objects no one would bid on, no one would recognize, but to him they are treasures. They don't rise in market value, but they grow in worth, depending on how he chooses to live. Richard Gere doesn't need his wealth to impress, but every plot of land he bought, every house he built, every bottle of wine he produced, every car he drove, and every organization he quietly backed prove one thing: he never rejected wealth. He simply chose to be rich in a way Hollywood could never reenact. He sold his house, traded land, changed his lifestyle, but the deepest shift in Richard Gere's life didn't come from real estate, politics, or even age. It came from a woman and the little children who now call him Dad. At an age when many Hollywood stars choose solitude behind the walls of former glory, Richard Gere is arranging flowers with his 4-year-old son in a garden in Madrid, a scene of such peace and such surprise for those who once knew him as the cold, seductive lover on screen. Alejandra Silva, his current wife, is a Spanish social activist and daughter of former Real Madrid vice president Ignacio Silva. Born into an elite family, Alejandra was raised amidst politics, football, and media, but chose a quiet life, dedicating herself to humanitarian work. They married in 2018 in a simple ceremony in New York, where two opposite worlds came together, not for the spotlight, but to find a place they both belonged. A year later, at age 70, Richard Gere welcomed his. He once said something very simple: happy wife, happy life for his wife. He left America for his wife. He sold the property he'd held onto for 35 years for his wife. He learned Spanish, changed homes, changed time zones, changed his definition of success in 2024 after selling all his U.S. assets. Richard Gere officially moved his family to Spain, living full-time in a historic villa in Alcobendas, north of Madrid. No longer just a retreat, not a second home, but a place to start again as an ordinary man. He told Vanity Fair Spain, "My wife gave me 6 years to live in my world now. It's time. I live in hers." But Richard Gere doesn't just live to enjoy. Alongside Alejandra, he's involved with Hogar, a non-profit aimed at ending homelessness in Spain. Within 5 years, they also support Sierra Amar in Mexico, a sustainable coastal restoration program where he doesn't give speeches but invests, observes, and leaves a lasting mark. At the end of 2024, his family celebrated Christmas with 35 relatives at their Alcobendas home after Alejandra's grandmother passed away. It was Richard who encouraged his wife to carry on as the heart of the family, hosting Sunday lunches, setting the table for 3 generations. To him, Now success is no longer starring in a blockbuster earning million-dollar paychecks or attending red carpet premieres. Instead, it is a home filled with children's laughter, a wife who truly understands him, a morning that doesn't need an alarm, just sunlight and peace. And the most remarkable thing, he has 3 children born in 3 completely different chapters of his life. Homer, born in 2000, is his son with former wife Carrie Lowell. A quiet, no bar, no EDM, no VIP zones, just yoga, handcrafted wine, and a slow enough rhythm to hear your own thoughts. From Italy, he commissioned a special Brunello di Montalcino under the Bedford Post label, a wine rich in depth served at many of the charity events he hosted, not for mass sale, but for gifting, sharing, and sipping with an old friend on a peaceful afternoon. He has no yacht, no private jet, no startup, no fashion brand like other actors of his generation. What he has kept are a clear mind, enough kindness, and choices that don't need explanation in an era where fame is confused with visibility. Richard Gere has chosen to disappear, just to be himself. Richard Gere once said, "Stop treating yourself like an afterthought," and he has lived exactly that way. Not to stand out, but to be truly present for what truly matters. Now he no longer needs the leading role, no longer needs an Oscar, but he possesses a kind of wealth no spreadsheet can measure: a peaceful home with his wife and children, a historic estate nestled in Madrid, the villas he once built and walked away from, wine that bears his name, a meditative inn with no bar, and a life that is full but never excessive. An estimated net worth of over 120 million. Perhaps the greatest thing he holds is the right to live as a real human being, not a retreat, but a return. And maybe after all the glitter has faded, Richard Gere is simply showing us one truth: when you no longer wish to be seen is when you're finally seen the clearest. What do you think of Richard Gere's choice?